Hello, today I am excited to present you a new metaphilosophical theory that can explain microscale physics and macroscale physics, both how quantum particles are being made and how the universe operates in general. It is a theory of everything. This theory is grounded by a crazy mathematical coincidence that seems too wild to be ignored. This is because it can give us a clear and good picture on how quantum particles operates and functions. This theory consists of discrete dimensionalities along with the idea that information can never be repeated. There is 18 quarks, 6 leptons, 12 gauge bosons and 38 total particles if we include a hypothetical graviton. The dimensional axis has a left-right continuous pathway. Since in this theory I argue particles exist in discrete dimensionalities, we now get those types of information in each respective dimensionality. There is 2 in D1, 6 in D2 and 12 in D3 means we get 18 types of information. This so also happens to be the 18 types of quark information that we can get. This may be a mathematical coincidence, but I don't think so, as there is actually more mathematical symmetries in my theory. Because this also provides an explanation for why there is 3 flavors in quarks. This is because a 3D observer interacting with a discrete dimensionality will always have 3 types of axes to explain its coordinates. However, this is only from the perspective of a 3D observer. In reality, these lower dimensional states can be explained by fewer axis points. Leptons in my theory explains dimensional transfer. This is because in a dimensional transfer, there will always be 6 types of coordinates it can potentially occupy. I think this is logically sound as leptons don't experience the strong force. This illustrates leptons as unbounded by dimensional stability. A electron, which is a lepton, can absorb or emit a photon, which makes sense in my theory as photons are omnidimensional. Photons actually possesses all dimensions at once. My theory also has mathematical symmetries with gauge bosons. With a dimensional transfer from 1D to a 2D coordinate, we now get a natural explanation for our type of radiation. There coincidentally exist 4 types of bosons which mediates a type of radiation. Since D2 has far more spatial coordinates than D1, I think this naturally follows. When a 2D axis transfers to a 1D axis, we get a reduction in spatial coordinates. Smaller spatial coordinates can explain a force of combining. Then it logically follows that this is the strong nuclear force. The total number of quantum particles is 38. This is, however, too many to explain the dimensional axis points in discrete dimensional spaces. However, this can be solved if we exclude the Higgs boson and the hypothetical graviton. Since in my theory gravity can be explained as an emergent force, I don't think it's needed to have Higgs boson and a hypothetical graviton. So then the last 2 absurd quantum particles then becomes a way of describing dimensional transfer from 1D to 2D to 3D. Now let's delve deeper into how this theory is constructed. Space expansion accelerates continuously, meaning eventually all particles will be isolated within the entire observable universe. Since we are observing the universe expanding at an accelerated rate, I think this is actually very logical. I've never heard good arguments for why this acceleration would suddenly decide to stop. The next point is that information can't be deleted. This is generally agreed on by physicists. Information content always ought to increase, and the next one is very important as information can't be repeated in my theory. This comes from a philosophical idea I have where 4 equals 4 is a meaningless statement, as you can just say 4 instead. To illustrate this in an analogy, if I were to pause all action in the entire universe continuously, how would this be any different from me just deleting all information in the entire universe? A counter-argument is that potential action is still there as soon as I click on the resume button. However, I said pause continuously, which actually would make this meaningless. A counter-argument could be quantum particles are indistinguishable from one another. However, I refute this by saying that no coordinates are the same, meaning all quantum particles have a different historical past and a potential future. This provides a very unique set of information for all particles. Then a counter-argument could be Bose-Einstein condensate have multiple bosons occupying the same coordinates and momentum and act like a single boson. My refutal is that the total energy and the particles multiply, meaning its information also increases. With this philosophical foundation, I have now explained how change occurs and what causes energy. Energy then being potential coordinates to be described. The other rules are that particles exist in discrete dimensional points. Particles have infinite potential. Photons are omnidimensional. I argue existence is fundamental, as if there is no existence, I could not ask this question in the first place. The lowest state of existence that I can imagine is a single particle in a one-dimensional axis where it can go either left or right. Once all one-dimensional coordinates has been quantified, we now get repetitive information. This is a problem as I described earlier. I then argue that these one-dimensional coordinates now multiply to avoid repeatance. However, this multiplicity of one-dimensional coordinates becomes also indistinguishable from one another, unless there's a relative transfer of information in between these coordinates. This makes it so this infinite amount of one-dimensional axis points becomes related to each other, creating a greater totality of information. I claim infinity of information both right and left for the one-dimensional axis point because there's nothing to prevent these particles from existing in all points at once. The same concept will be also true for the multiplicity of one-dimensional points and a connection between those one-dimensional points creating the totality of two dimensions. The next step is the three-dimensional points. I'm sorry for this three-dimensional illustration that I drew being quite chaotic, but I mean this is the best I could. This 3D illustration oversimplifies the 3D axis point as a planar direction to the one-dimensional point. However, in reality, it moves in a circular motion to its one-dimensional point. The smaller the dimension is, the higher energy concentration there is. However, then we get a higher degree of repetitive information. This then makes it so that particles seeks to move to 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. This then becomes the explanation for why the universe expands. However, I also argue that particles prefers to stay in a lower dimensional state. This is because there is a requirement of energy to move between dimensional states. All in all, this actually explains a dynamism between two different forces, one of expansion and one of retraction. One being dark matter and the other being dark energy. Then the question is, why is three-dimensional coordinates created? This is actually quite difficult to argue for, but I do have a sub-theory to explain this. It's based on the idea of dimensional reset. My idea is that eventually 3D forces will isolate 2D forces from having any impact to 1D forces. This cancels out 2D forces, which means 3D forces, which is a emergent phenomena from 2D forces, becomes also obsolete. Here 2D and 3D is removed. The only remaining force is 1D, and from here on we get a new development of a new universe. A new Big Bang or new Big Flash, which is more accurately described as. The universe would look like this with unique epochs caused by one-dimensional expansions. Eventually all quantum particles becomes isolated from their own perspective. From their own perspective, they are the only particle in the entire observable universe. This causes a dimensional reset to occur. Then all particles becomes indistinguishable from a scenario that I described earlier with a single axis point and a single particle. This then actually allows us to explain a type of time symmetry. We can now have a traceable continuous path before the Big Bang, as well as the end of the universe has a continuous future. And it all can be in a certain way calculated. This also allows us to have a philosophically sound explanation for the question of the first cause. The first cause then being existence continuously reassuring it exists. A 1D object cannot be quantified continuously by a 3D object. This is because from the interaction A of a 1D object to an interaction B, in between there is no other interaction and its state can't be grounded or traced. This makes the one-dimensional object appear to teleport to a 3D observer. However, it is actually continuously moving in its own axis point, which is not observable from a 3D observer. So with quantum uncertainty, where we can see particles being in multiple positions at once and seemingly just appearing and disappearing out of nowhere, is rather just a 3D observer incapability of tracing the 1D particle. With a 2D particle, we can have a traceable path as its y-axis, which is going the other direction of its movement, can have a continuous interaction with external 3D particles. This continuously updates the particle's coordinates for a 3D observer. Once this y-axis no longer has external particles interacting with it, a 2D object then becomes untraceable. This then explains how 2D structure gets cancelled during the end of the universe. As I said, there is no external particles to interact with during the end of the universe. Then we get a dimensional reset. Then the conclusion is that a one-dimensional particle does not have a traceable path, while the two-dimensional particle does. This allows us for a unique, interesting perspective on photons. Photons has a duality of both being a particle and a wave at the same time. When a photon is in a particle-like state, it is considered a two-dimensional object as it has a traceable path, while when it's in a wave-like state, it does not have any traceable photons and then can be considered a 1D particle from its own reference point going from A to B instantly, seemingly teleporting for a 3D observer. However, it also has a wave. This wave is fundamentally a three-dimensional coordinate. This then describes photons as an omnidimensional object. This makes sense as there is no mathematical limit for how large or small this wave can become. One may then conclude photons to be a triality rather than a duality. This then gives a new, unique perspective on what happens when there is a single photon in the entire observable universe. Then its omnidimensional state has been quantified, meaning it has now 100% positional information and 0% momentum. This would originally break the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, however, this would actually be a feature rather than a problem, as then we get an infinite wave spread. Since waves travel instantly and it is infinite as I described, this wave may reach towards another part of the universe beyond the observable universe from its own perspective, to then collapse its wave function and seemingly teleport from one point in the universe to another. This may also solve the famous Schrödinger's cat paradox. This is because when a measurement device is interacting with a particle with multitude of positional points at the same time, the wave-like structure is actually not probabilistic but deterministic within its one-dimensional coordinates, but not traceable from a 3D measurement device. Remember, 1D particles are not traceable from a 3D observer within my theory. And within the non-locality issue, particles are rather multiplied, and a faster-than-light interaction becomes a meaningless statement as the two particles has only a correlative creation. I argue that black holes are dimensional filtration units, as they transfer particles from this epoch to the next one. Once entering a black hole, you can no longer have movement on the three-dimensional axis. As if you could do so, you now have the potential to escape the event horizon from inside the black hole, making the black hole very bright. The only path a particle can go towards once it passes the event horizon is its singularity. And with this, I conclude my metaphilosophical theory of everything. I hope this can provide you a new perspective on how to view the philosophy of the nature of the universe. I will also be happy to take counterarguments against this theory so I can develop it further. Thank you for your attention.